Globally speaking, is AI getting more or less safe with time? Marina Danilevsky is a senior research scientist. Marina, welcome back to the show. What do you think?
Both.
Okay, all right, we'll get into that. Chris Hay is a distinguished engineer and CTO of customer transformation. Chris, what do you think? More or less safe with time?
I think it's getting more safe with time, so I'm pretty pleased with that.
And joining us for the very first time is Anastasia Stasenko, who is the CEO and co-founder of Pleias. Anastasia, more or less safe?
It's definitely getting safer because it's getting more open source.
All right, great. More to dive into. All that and more on today's Mixture of Experts. Greetings from Paris. I'm Tim Hwang, and welcome to Mixture of Experts. Each week, MOE is the place to tune into to hear how leading researchers, engineers, entrepreneurs, technologists, and many more are thinking about the latest trends in artificial intelligence. As always, we have a lot to cover, way too much to cover. We're going to talk about test time scaling. We're going to talk about a new blog post from Sam Altman. We'll talk about Anthropic's new economic index. But first, given that I'm in Paris and Anastasia's in Paris as well, we want to talk about the Paris AI Action Summit. So this is the latest edition of a series of summits that governments have been holding around AI in the last few years. This year is hosted by the French government. And it collects representatives from civil society, governments, companies, and more to talk about and set sort of standards and guidelines around the development of AI. And there were some really big announcements that we want to get into. Anastasia, it's really exciting to have you on the show, in part because you were sort of directly involved in some of these events. I understand basically that Macron has announced an enormous, I think it's like $100 billion fund to support AI and support AI specifically in France. And I know pleias is part of that, but if you want to tell us just a little bit more about how you got involved and what you're going to be doing with this new fund.
Yes, of course. Well, so first of all, there actually have been multiple announcements about investment. We do love announcing investment in France. We do hope that the real action will follow. However, what's important to say is that 109 billion investment fund is actually not only France investing. This is an international and there are some private companies involved. For example, Iliad Group, which is a free mobile company, basically given over $4 billion, etc. And this fund has the objective to really focus on sovereign European AI infrastructure, right? So this is one part of this, and it's true that we have been hearing for a long time that Europe is lagging behind in terms of AI infrastructure, right? We don't have enough GPUs to basically neither train frontier models nor to then run inference for actually scaled AI applications, right? I'm not sure that this is entirely true, and I'm not even sure that we should be really going into scaling AI infrastructure in the world where we actually have ecological imperatives kind of hunting us at the same time. Another big one was the announcement of the current AI, which is actually AI for public good foundation.
Yeah, no, and this is like a very particular part of pleias's work, right? Because I know you guys are specifically working on sort of open source and open data models ultimately.
Yes, totally. And we have actually trained the world first models on exclusively open data, open in the strong sense of this word, without copyrighted material, with permissive licenses only. And it's true that opening data and creating this open data infrastructure is something that is important to us, but actually is important to larger AI communities, which is of today actually cannot advance as fast or work with as many applications for the good of the communities, which are even think about low resource languages, think about more specific applications without actually being supported by the initiatives such as current AI. So this foundation with already 400 million secured for the first year aims to actually raise over $2 billion for their five-year run. at least as of now. And yeah, we are very happy to be part of this from the very beginning. We have signed the open letter with 10 other industry leaders, such as Mistral, Aleph Alpha, Hugging Face, etc., etc. So it's all very exciting, and I'm most particularly excited about data finally not being like kind of the forgotten piece of this AI hype, and like not only hype but like AI development in general.
For sure, yeah. And I think it's something that we talk a lot about on the show is just how much like the data piece often gets lost, even though arguably it's like the most important part of the whole thing. um, One of the themes I did want to pick up on, Politico did this interesting article. The headline I'll just read here was, quote, "How the world stopped worrying and learn to love AI." And sort of the argument of the article was that, the last few summits had really focused on like safety and security around the model. But in contrast, I think this year there was just a lot more kind of lean forward, like we just need to deploy this faster and better and bigger than ever before. And I guess, Marina, maybe I'll call on you because I know in response to the first question you said, well, is it getting safer or less safe? Well, maybe a little bit of both. I'm curious about kind of what you meant by that and how you think about it, particularly in this context where it feels like at least kind of world leaders are like rah-rah in a way that maybe they haven't been so much in the past.
World leaders have FOMO. So they're saying, well, safety is all well and good, but everybody else is working on this, so we better go ahead and work on this too. And why I say both is because there are aspects in which the safety is getting better. There are aspects in which the power of the models makes it easier, again, to do potentially more deeply nuanced and misleading tasks. And so the safety is just sort of getting, I think, more complicated. So less the model's going to teach you to build a bomb, and more the model can still potentially over time, depending on how it's used, have maybe not effects that you intend. I mean, always when you have technology, you let it out and you can't always control where it goes. It's going to go where it goes. So this has always been, to me, the flip coin of the democratization of AI. Having it in more hands is going to be always at the same time good and bad.
And I guess, Chris, this is a good chance to kind of bring you in as well. I know you were playing the voice of kind of optimism here, saying, well, overall, things are getting, in fact, safer. And, I guess I had maybe one way of nuancing this question a little bit is to talk about kind of like at what layers it's getting more or less safe. It seems to me, at least kind of on the regulatory side, there's been more of a push certainly to kind of say, well, look, we don't want to restrict this technology. Let's leave it more open, which I think certainly some people think is like less safe, right? But I think there's also people saying, look, our techniques around safety are getting a lot stronger as well. Is that kind of how you think about it, like the argument for why it's safer?
I think so. I mean, if I think of the models, if we even just go back 2 years ago, right, think of like the GPT version 3 at that point, or if you think of the early open source models, like the kind of, remember Llama 1, etc. Now, if we start to think about that, I mean, come on, it's like those models were terrible in comparison to today's models. Today's models are much more safer. They come back with better answers. They hallucinate less. And then if we think about things from a stack perspective, we've now got the guard models. We were talking about that last week. The idea of being able to reduce bias, how we train the models are a lot better. So I think in general, we're thinking about this a lot more. Now, that's not to say that that we are not going to be much safer in the future, and we haven't got a long way to go, and we can't do bad things with models today. Of course you can, but then the way I like to think about it is my friend used to write test code for missiles, and he was like the worst programmer I ever met. So I'm like, would I even want an old llama model doing that versus him writing that code? You know what? I'm like, I think it's
actually maybe
better.
It's safer.
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
Anastasia, as kind of a model developer in the space, how's pleias thinking about safety? Do you feel it's kind of like distinctive a little bit from what you see elsewhere? I know kind of philosophically you're very kind of focused on open, but kind of curious about if you're also trying to kind of blaze a new trail in the safety space as well.
For us, we don't develop conversational models. We don't develop chatbots. We do really specialize in the models for both data processing and data processing till it goes to the retrieval augmented generation. So basically for us, the most important part when it comes to safety is actually the development of the curated and vetted databases which are prepared well for them to be used for factual AI. And this is where actually not that much work is done nowadays, because you still, for example, do not have good multilingual, and I insist on the word multilingual, classifiers, even for sentiment analysis. You don't have good toxicity classifiers, which you can actually understand what data they have been trained on and why we say this is toxic and this is not. I mean, there is so much work to be done to actually prepare good data foundations for factual AI, and where you can actually have more bound models to the data, to the even proprietary data, or to the open data that you use in your stack. And this is where we concentrate our efforts. We are not building AGI. We don't have resources for, and I'm not even sure we do need to, for multiple reasons. But we do need this working horses, these small models, which allow to work through data which is not good now, but can be brought to the quality where this kind of RAG applications or whatever technology will be brought afterwards to this kind of live factual AI would be deployed.
I was just going to say, I know a guy who's got $109 billion that he might be able to help you build AGI, Anastasia. You might want to tap him up for it. Just a thought.
We will get to that gentleman a little bit later in the show. One of the things I do want to talk about is that there's the paper of the week, the flavor of the week, was this simple test time scaling paper that I feel like a lot of people have been talking about. I'll kind of sketch the overview. If you have been watching, of course, O1 Preview came out, and one of OpenAI's kind of stated sort of advancements in the model was really the idea of test time compute. Kind of the idea that you'll take a model, you'll get it to basically think harder, and it's able to achieve much better results as a result. This paper came out saying, look, we are trying out this technique that we call S1, where in order to try to replicate sort of O1 Preview's reasoning ability, we collected about 1,000 questions and their kind of reasoning traces. And we use a couple of different hacks. I think one of my favorite hacks is one where they just insert the token wait to get the model to keep thinking about a problem rather than stopping. And they say, look, with all these kind of pretty cheap, like rough and ready hacks, we're able to get a model that's right up there and competitive with O1 Preview. So kind of a shocking result, I guess, in some sense, but maybe actually, Chris, I see you're already going off mute. Like, is it that shocking that people can just do this replication? Because I thought this was going to be the new thing, right? Like test time compute is going to change everything. It's going to be the new whiz bang technology. And then these people, these researchers have just replicated it in basically no time and at much lower cost, apparently.
I think it's the How I Met Your Mother Barney Stinson method. What's 25 plus 2? Wait for it. Wait for it. 27. And that's the basic technique, as you said there. And no, it's not a surprise, right? We kind of already know there from the model that the longer that it spends thinking about it and being able to generate more tokens, then it's going to have the opportunity to reflect. And we saw that in the DeepSeek paper, right? I mean, ultimately, the trick underneath that was to create multiple samples, take longer, get longer chain of thoughts. And once you have longer chain of thoughts, then the model's more likely to get to the answer. And that's effectively what they're doing there. And then they're essentially rejection sampling anything that has sort of bad chain of thoughts there, get rid of that. And therefore, you're going to end up with a quality data. So I don't think this is a surprise, but it's really cool that it works with just one token, right? Which is the weight token. And then it generates that chain of thought. And I think, if I'm honest, in the same way as the kind of step-by-step thing, in about 2 years' time, probably less than that, we're not going to do these little hacks anymore, because what we're going to do is we are going to have a good set of kind of cold start chain of thought data set to be able to bootstrap the model with anyway. And therefore, going along and saying, wait, or whatever, isn't going to have that effect, because the model's going to be producing the correct chain of thoughts in the first place. But I think from this kind of starting with a kind of relatively simple and small base model, I think it was the Qwen 2.5 base model they used, but be able to sort of generate out those chain of thoughts very, very quickly and get to sort of decent performance on that domain. I think great job, right? But it's really just building upon the work that kind of everybody's seen with DeepSeek. So yeah, great job from them.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like what I like about the solution of the wait. It's like, it's just a classy solution. It's like very simple, but really nails it. Marina, one of the questions I have kind of like reading this paper is just like, how far can the test time compute go? Because it kind of feels like one of the remarkable things is you take arguably less sophisticated models and you just get way better performance. And I guess there's kind of a question just like how far that can go, or if like basically, your base level model just sets a ceiling at some point on how far you can kind of reason up and be kind of at parity with much more sophisticated models. Are you sort of optimistic that like essentially test time compute will take us very, very far? Or is this kind of just like it's sort of a hack at the margin for some of these things?
So first I'll say that, yeah, it might be a less sophisticated model. It's more sophisticated data. So they didn't take 1,000 data points. They took 59,000 data points. And there was a whole bunch of different filtering and qualifying and stratifying and the rest of it that got them down to that 1,000. They spent some time talking about quality, difficulty, diversity. Listen, couldn't agree more. Okay, because everything at that point in time, the work is going to be done somewhere. If it's not going to be done in the model, having to deal with the noise of a whole bunch of data points, instead it's going to be done with these are really, really good representative data points. And like Chris said, weight sounds like, oh, let's think step by step when that little trick was introduced. There's other ways to do this. You can have, again, examples that where you take through the thinking of, well, as you go through this model, you could say, oh, we tried this way. That didn't work. Let's back up. This consistently reminds me of taking my 9-year-old through his math problems, where it's like, first you try this. Oh, seems like this is not working. Why don't you back up? Like these are the kind of tokens that you go through and go through. And the important thing again here is what data is being used. It's good that people are trying to get the compute down. This is a positive thing because I think right now we're still in a land of a really huge amount of waste. You do not need things that big with data that is that much and that noisy. Quality goes a really long way. So I think the more we continue to focus on the quality and the type of data that's being used here, the more progress we're going to make.
This is all very interesting in the context of like openness versus closeness in data. Because I feel like one of the arguments that I've heard from some people is, well, we just need so much data that it's impossible for us to figure out what's open and closed, and we just need to be able to like use it.
Totally, and you don't need that. You don't need the vast amount. You need vast amounts of data, but you first of all you need good quality data, reason rich data. However, what is really interesting in this moment with after post DeepSeek moment and test time compute, etc., is that we are seeing that we can actually boost smaller models, which will have smaller impact actually in terms of energy, etc. And we can also boost them for specific domain reasoning, and it has been happening specifically for math and coding. And at pleias, as of now, we are actually we have started to work on this for legal reasoning, and these are the domains where you actually do have truth. You can create chain of thought, you can create the verifiers, etc. But those data sets are a little bit more complicated to create than the coding and the math ones. And we have been experimenting with this for legal reasoning, reasoning over administrative documents, as well as even sociological reasoning, because you actually have, you can have quite clear guidelines that you can depart from. But all of these things are really, let's say, emerging at this point. And I'm very much interested in how it will help to boost smaller, specialized model for, let's say, industry and for specific domains outside of general reasoning capabilities, which are tested on traditional benchmarks, basically math, coding, on these kind of things.
And I think it's like the future is really in these small models.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've now imagined this new future where people will be like, oh my goodness, they're going to court and they're only bringing their 2.5 billion parameter model. That model is up against a lawyer with a 70 billion parameter model. And then they'll be like, oh no, the judge has got a 405 billion parameter model. And then the witness is, oh no, that is a 3 billion parameter witness. Is this our legal future where we're going to be having small models versus large models in court? I find that future interesting.
Actually, for me, this is a more desirable future than being governed by one AGI. I mean, this is like, at least, you have to, it's kind of more capitalistic future that we are discussing here. Smaller models accompanying some, bigger models accompanying others. I'm not sure that I want to live in the one AGI world, but that's probably just me.
Maybe that'll be our next like hot take question at the top of the next episode. The next topic we will bring up is a blog post that came out from Sam Altman this week, simply entitled 3 Observations. It's a provocative blog post, and I figured it would just be sort of interesting to raise and talk about. The effect of the blog post, I think, is to talk a little bit about the economic impact that we expect to see as AI systems get more and more powerful. And in effect, I think Sam makes these kind of 2 big arguments. The first one is that we see model performance scaling, right? So the bigger we get with models, the better they are, which has kind of been a longstanding kind of article of faith in the machine learning community. And then the second bit is that, like, as the costs of delivering these models drop, we're just seeing sort of demand keep increasing. And sort of his ultimate argument is, look, we should keep scaling. Things will get cheaper, and that will ultimately have a sort of gigantic impact on the economy. And, in effect, it's kind of a case for why people should continue believing in OpenAI in some ways, because I think this is really, at the core, their sort of value proposition. And I want to get this kind of group's take as kind of both folks who really do believe these technologies are going to get a lot better in the coming years, but also I think have tended to be, I would say AGI skeptics overall about where all this is going. And I guess maybe, Marina, I'll pick on you first. Curious about kind of what you thought about the blog post. Do you sort of agree with the argument? If you got quibbles with it, kind of curious about where you felt there was like problems in the logic, and maybe that side tells us everything we need to know.
Sam's the main point that I cottoned onto, there was a couple. So first of all, his point 3, the socioeconomic value of linearly increasing intelligence is super exponential in nature. We see no reason for exponentially increasing investment to stop in the near future. Give me more money. Money to me, give it. Give it now. More to me money. Seems to be most of the message here. And then also, I don't think that he, along with very often a lot of other folks in Silicon Valley, live in the real world very often, because when they're making statements like, hey, in 10 years, everybody is going to want to and be able to and get benefit from accessing the AI that only some people can access now. No, things don't go in that kind of a scale, and that is not the kind of a need that people have and the benefit that people are going to have. There's a real specific perspective that he has. And again, I think that that is more narrow and more limited, and in some ways a little bit off-putting, at least to me. Again, I'd like people to understand what the benefits and the use of this technology are without making statements like this, which I feel like undermine the work that a lot of us actually do in the field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so if I have it right, it seems like part of the critique is just that it's like an overstatement.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Chris, what do you think?
I love it. I love Sam Altman. Go for it, Sam. It's like, it's going to change the world. It's great. I think everybody's right. I think you got to have a super positive attitude in this sense, right? Which is, this is going to be a world-changing technology, and we can see that from how good things have improved over time there. So it's going to have an impact. Of course, it's going to have an impact, right? But then new value creation is going to happen. We're going to do new ways of doing things. I think that's great. So I think it's healthy to talk about, what the impact is going to be. Is it likely to be somewhere in between? Maybe, because you know what? As soon as we get something that's super cool, we then just take it for granted as normal, and then we move on from there. I mean, I can guarantee. I've said this for a while. I think as soon as we get AGI, and we can define what an AGI is later. But I think the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to be put in a box, and then there's going to be a big museum open somewhere, and we're all going to walk in and go, "You can chat with the AGI," and we'll be like, "Ooh, there's the AGI." So that thing's going to be in a box for a while. That's his future, like a kind of circus. But honestly, I am super positive about things. I think that this is a world-changing technology. Is it going to be like a conscious thing or anything like that? No. But if we look at things like coding, the reality is that even if you're using kind of like the O1 models or the O3 mini models today, they are better for like a lot of tasks, to be able to churn out that code really quickly at a super high quality. And that is a reality. And if we think it's going to stay in that domain, I think we're kidding ourselves, right? As the cost comes down, more and more people are going to use this.
Yeah, and this is kind of, I'm trying to parse optimisms, I guess, in some sense, right? Because I think, like, on one hand, Marina, I agree with you, which is like the blog post is very frustrating. Like, the tone is very frustrating to me. On the other hand, it's like, okay, Tim, but do you believe the technology will have like a really big impact? I'm like, oh yeah, for sure. I think it will have a really big impact. And it's like kind of like parsing, like, how do you articulate a way of being optimistic about this stuff that doesn't kind of fall into the usual valley tropes seems to be like part of the problem.
Not being in the valley, I mean, for me, just to probably continue with the optimism, the ChatGPT moment was like a huge moment of liberation. I don't like to write. And we don't sometimes understand the the emancipation, liberation power of these technologies for people who actually who had to really struggle with, let's say, writing, with coding, who didn't have access to this, who had less this intelligence, who use this as tools now to actually do something they weren't able to do before. However, this being said, I'm not sure that this emancipating power is really well understood and put in the place where it should be put, because we are kind of going and hunting the AGI, where actually we do need like this assistance helping us to be what we actually can be in the society, with less constraints on like how you can learn to code, how you can learn to write well, and how not to be judged by the society and by the economic system on the sheer amount of orthographic errors that you are making. For me, this is like more important than like hunting the AGI. However, I think that, and Marina, you actually brought up this third point of exponential growth. The planet is limited. We do have limited resources, and I'm very much surprised to read such takes, because AGI won't resolve the issues of ecological crisis that we are going through. We cannot, and we won't have time to build enough nuclear power plants to actually run everything on nuclear energy. And even with nuclear energy, it won't help us to resolve the ecological crisis. So I'm sorry to say this. It's for me, like, and probably this is a better like European perspective, an old-fashioned way of saying this. We cannot just forget everything we were saying just 2 years before, and like, okay, yeah, AGI will solve everything. It won't solve everything, just like internet didn't solve everything. You still have lots of places in multiple continents without internet access. And we still haven't resolved multiple issues which won't be resolved with AGI. So, I mean, I really do feel that we need to be more pragmatic. And this is also important because Sam does this, and I actually heard him do the same speech at the Elysee Palace in front of Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday, where he basically said the same and saying, we need to invest. Let's invest in data centers. We need to be careful about this calls for investment and how they will actually really impact the society without saying we don't need this technology. We do need it. We need to develop it, but in a reasonable way, which is not building a data center near every school, So
I think I agree but disagree a lot. And I think the reason is that I don't think we need nuclear power stations, as you say. I think, I know Macron's offering is nuclear power stations for everybody as part of his 109 billion. But the reality is, with test time compute, we should be spending less time focusing on the pre-training stage. Now, that's not to say that we're not going to be pre-training, but it shouldn't be like pre-train. With test time compute, you can get very, very far, as we were just talking earlier in the podcast with the S1 models, by just using high quality data sets. So being able to push that to longer chain of thoughts, being able to push that onto consumer grade hardware, I think we are already proving that scaling can occur at a lower cost. So I think if we're needing nuclear power stations to be able to scale AI, then I think we're on the wrong track there.
But the question is inference, not pre-training only. So it's a much bigger chain for energy, and this is
But I can run inference. I can run inference on my laptop, right, with my Apple Silicon chips. It's fine. The cost of inference is much lower than the cost of training.
Of course it is. But once we do scale AI applications, it will also be a question, however. But let's agree to disagree.
That's not how this podcast works.
Yes, it's not. I'll say something that might be funny coming from my background as a language primary study person, which is we should not forget the power of these models in other non-language domains, multimodality, sensors, time series, all sorts of kinds of things. There is so much use to be gotten out of these, not only in helping you write, which no, I love it too. I hate writing emails. Not only in helping you write code, but also imagine all of the ways in which you could improve factory work. Imagine all the ways in which you could improve tracking the sensors that we put on migratory animals to see if we can help, their habitats out. All sorts of things like that. If we really actually broaden where this technology could be thought of being used, because again, remember, this technology actually has nothing to do with language. Let's just remember that. It doesn't. And then I think that we could actually go in places that are much more interesting, much more pragmatic, much more practical, and maybe not only focus on the parts that are language, and certainly not on chasing AGI.
Last item I really wanted to touch on was just a kind of fun sort of data set that Anthropic put out. They're calling it the Anthropic Economic Index. And what I like about it so much is if you remember from the early days of Google, they had a project they did called Google Flu, which is basically using people's search results to try to identify where people were getting sick and creating basically like a live heat map of like where illness was kind of spreading around a population. And this in some ways is kind of like a weird update of it in some ways, only it's really looking rather than at people getting sick, what people are even using AI for. And so Anthropic basically looked across a sampling of all of its conversations and using an anonymized set of them said, okay, well, what can we learn about how AI is kind of spreading across the economy? And they reached some pretty interesting results. I recommend going on their website and looking at the blog posts that they did. The one that I kind of wanted to touch on, because we don't have too much time left in the episode, is really this finding that right now, about 36% of usage of AI assistance is really still in software development and technical writing tasks. And I think this is almost to kind of Marina's point, which is that we've kind of sold this technology or thought about this technology as this kind of economy spanning thing. But one of Anthropic's findings is that it still ends up being quite concentrated what people are actually using it for. And outside of that, it's kind of very, very thin. And so we just want to first kind of talk a little bit about that result, and happy to talk about any of the other data that they kind of mentioned. But I think that finding was just so interesting because it, at least for me, was kind of a violation of my expectations. I was like, oh, people are using it for writing emails and composing poems and essays and, all this other stuff. But still, it's ultimately very much in technical development. It's like a software tool. I guess, Anastasia, do you think we should be surprised, or am I just like kind of not with it?
It's actually, this study corroborates what we have been also seeing in other studies, as well as, the one that we have conducted for the French government based on the usages that have been done with the Copilot we developed for them. I think that one of the reasons is when I actually, for example, see how far from software development and even from, let's say, application tasks in marketing, etc. For example, financial analysis and things like this are. I really do think that once again, the tools that we have now, these chatbots, they're not really adapted to the exact knowledge work that people in other industries do have. For the software development, I wasn't surprised, and it's true that also Anthropic has been largely marketed as the state-of-the-art coding tool, so it's kind of normal to say this. I think and they say it in the paper themselves, so this could be a little bit biased because of this. However, I really do think that this study shows how actually far we are from a wider adoption of large language models as everyday tools at work, which is still surprising. I mean, we could think that, we all use it now. We actually don't. And there are some parts of the population that are much more exposed to this. And it will require also quite an important part of education on workplaces actually to the people who are using it now less, as well as UX and like other product adaptations from the model providers, of course, as well.
Chris, I guess this almost builds a little bit on, I think you were making a joke earlier, which is like, we're going to invent the AGI and it will just kind of live in the zoo for a bit. Like, this is literally it, right? Like, not AGI, but like we have like really powerful AI systems, but it's like still largely like a technical industry phenomenon. I'm sure, I mean, Anthropic would look at this data and say, we have so much more market. We can grow so much more. I guess the pessimist view is like, well, maybe ultimately this thing is most useful and will continue to be most useful in stuff like coding. Is that a concern that you think for the AI industry?
No, I think I'm going to agree with Anastasia on this one, which is that I think if you asked Mo and Shandon what the primary use of glass bottles are, I'm pretty sure 30% of them is going to say champagne, right? And I think that is the reality for Anthropic, as Anastasia said, right? Claude is marketed as this the best at coding. If you think of the ecosystem, so if you think of things like Klein, etc., the default models that they put in there is Claude, right? So so anybody in that industry knows that up until the reasoning models point of view, you would typically go to Claude for coding tasks. So I really think that data is skewed, as you say there. So I think that's probably where it is. So if we asked OpenAI what the primary uses are, I think you would get a different result set. I think it would be a different variation, just because that's kind of more aimed at a wider consumer base. And I would even probably argue that the GPT-4o Mini versus the O1 Mini versus the O3 Mini or the O1 Pro would have a completely different usage set of data there as well. So I think it's interesting that they've came back with it, but I just don't know how to read into those answers, just because it's really a very thin vertical slice, in my opinion.
Yeah, all it's telling you about is like what Anthropic's being used for.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it's representative of the world. I don't think it's representative of America. I don't think it's representative of UK. To your point, Tim, it's representative of how Claude and Anthropic is used. Which is super interesting. But yeah, that's what it is.
I mean, they explicitly say that. They freely admit it and explicitly say it. They say that one of the biggest points of releasing this data set is to release this data set and to hope that we can get something from other people that's kind of similar. It's like releasing search logs. You're never going to get all of them, but it's nice to get something. I don't know. I liked the sort of economic perspective. They were very careful with stating their limitations or their assumptions that you shouldn't read into it. And it's more about the process of the analysis than looking at the results of the analysis. I agree with that.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, Marina, if I could kind of follow up question there. I think one of the ones that I had to kind of talk about with the panel was, this is cool because I think to date we really haven't seen these companies say, based on all the aggregate data we have, there's useful things we can build on top of it. And I think this kind of is like a sort of new start in some ways, right? Rather than them simply saying, oh, we provide an AI tool you can use. This is like our platform now gives a signal about the world at large. I guess I had a question for you is like, do you think companies are going to do more of that going forwards, or if this is kind of like, well, more of a demo project more than anything else?
I don't know. I think this technology is still a hammer in search of a lot more nails. We've gotten a couple of nails, but there's a lot more out there. And given the investment that people have put in and are apparently wanting to continue to put in, it'd be nice to find some more nails. And go out and try to figure out from people like, hey, do you even know how to use this technology? Or do you not know? Because I don't think yet we're at the point where people have an intuitive knowledge of how to use it. When we first started with the internet, people didn't quite know how to use it correctly. People got better, and you can make endless examples here. So we haven't gotten there yet. I think it's actually to companies' benefit to continue to get people more comfortable having a broader view of this and all the rest of it, and not just makes this seem like, oh, cool, this is by tech folks, for tech folks, written about, by tech folks. Like, you're going to run a market, as you said correctly.
Yeah, and I think that will be a really long process of just like understanding how to use it. Like I think about those, if you've ever seen those early films of people just as film cameras were coming out, and you basically see people line up and they kind of like pose it completely still, assuming that it was like a photograph versus like a film camera. And it's like it took a while for us to be like, oh, you can do movies with this. It's not just like a camera. So maybe we're at that early stage with AI as well. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Chris, Marina, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate you doing double duty for 2 episodes in a row. Anastasia, it was great having you on the show. We'll have to have you back at some other time. And thanks to all you listeners for joining us as always. If you enjoyed what you heard, you can get us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and podcast platforms everywhere. And we will see you next week on Mixture of Experts.